This video has less to do with Easy Company of the 506th itself, and more to do with the US Army's at times nonsensical methods to preserve unit identity. Easy Company is just a good vehicle to have that conversation. I'm prefacing this by saying I'm covering one of the most pedantic topics of all time, US Army unit lineage. A topic so unintuitive that my Patreon Discord has a sticker for whenever it's mentioned. To sum it up, the lineage of Company E, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment that fought during World War II and was featured in Band of Brothers has officially, keyword, been inactive for over half a century, and the reason why is confusing and, dare I say, a little stupid. To tell this story, we'll have to go back to World War II. But first, thanks to my patrons and channel members who make these videos possible. The featured task force this episode is the 13th Air Mobile Regiment. They ride in helimobile dune buggies and their insignia is a parabat.
Look at it! It's freaking bats. I love Halloween.
But anyway, when the US Army's Parachute Infantry Regiments were created during the war, they had 9 rifle companies as maneuver elements. These were lettered in sequence from able to item and split equally between 3 battalions, which were numbered 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. The companies were organic to these battalions, but the battalions themselves were somewhat unimportant in terms of lineage. As the regiment had 9 lettered companies divided by 3, 1st Battalion got Able, Baker, and Charlie, while 2nd Battalion started with Dog. During the events of Band of Brothers, the famous Easy Company was the second line company of 2nd Battalion. In addition, there were battalion headquarters companies, the regimental headquarters company, service company, and attached medical. None of those had letters or numbers. After the war, the Parachute Infantry Regiments were renamed Airborne Infantry Regiments, the attached medical became a formal company, and they gained a heavier support company with anti-tank guns and 4.2-inch mortars, while each infantry battalion got an additional lettered weapons company. The weapons companies were lettered Dog in 1st Battalion, Howe in 2nd Battalion, and Mike in 3rd Battalion. Note that they skipped Company J to avoid confusion with the letter I and older typefaces. However, in 1957, the Army introduced a new system of unit designations called the Combat Arms Regimental System, or CARS. This was connected to the implementation of the Pentomic organization, where divisions consisting of 3 regiments with 3 battalions each were replaced by divisions of 5 battle groups with no battalions under them. I've talked about this before, but basically the Airborne Mafia found the regiments too rigid and wanted a more flexible designation system that allowed them to take units in and out of existence at will and shuffle them around while retaining a semblance of unit history. Under CARS, most regiments became what's called parent regiments. Their designations could be applied to any future raised battle group, battalion, or squadron and have a unit history that spanned back decades. Under the new system, battalions wouldn't be operationally limited by their parent regiment. In other words, battalions of the same regiment wouldn't have to fight together, wouldn't even have to be part of the same division, and could be inactivated or reactivated without affecting battalions of the same parent regiment. But things got really weird. To explain it, here's a plot of the regiment's companies. These were the Regimental HQ and HQ Company, rifle companies and battalion-level weapons companies lettered Alpha through Mike, 3 battalion HHCs, and regimental companies. First, the Regimental Headquarters Company basically ceased to exist. Regimental HQs were originally going to have an administrative function under Phase 5 of CARS, including training, recruitment, record-keeping, and maintaining regimental histories. However, this was viewed as inefficient in comparison to centralized branch training and was thus not implemented. Today, most parent regiments are purely flavor names and each battalion carries the same regimental colors, but modified with the battalion number in the top outer corner. There are exceptions like the 75th Rangers, 160th, and Brigade combat teams designated as cavalry regiments, but those are exceptions. Second, along with the regimental HQ, the regimental companies like the service and medical companies were outright disbanded, making their lineages unusable. Third, the lettered companies were used as the starting point for any new battalions or separate companies that carried the old regiment's name. This could continue all the way past Company M down to the original battalion HHCs in theory. The largest the 506th ever got, though, was 3 battalions during Vietnam. The original Company A initially became HHC 1st Battle Group before redesignating as 1st Battalion, Company B became HHC 2nd Battalion, and Company C was briefly HHC 3rd Battalion. That's even though before cars, those companies all served under 1st Battalion, and the original battalion HHC lineages go unused. However, a case of a very large parent regiment in terms of lineage was the 75th Infantry during Vietnam. When all active duty LRP companies with their different parent regiments were reflagged as separate airborne ranger companies under the 75th Infantry as the parent regiment, they were lettered Alpha all the way to Papa. In most battalions though, the new lettered companies would have completely new lineages and are ordered within their battalion rather than across the whole regiment. Each battalion would start with Company A regardless if it was 1st Battalion or 6th Battalion. Because the new line companies became more intertwined with their battalion rather than their regiment, and a single parent regiment may have several companies of the same letter, they also added the battalion number to the company guidons. A consequence of the new system is the original company lineages did not go to line companies contained within the battalions. For example, if the modern 2nd Battalion 506th Infantry hypothetically had 5 organic line companies, the last one officially being Echo Company, that company would not be related to the 506's Company E of World War II, even though they share a letter and a battalion. The lineage of Company E 506 Infantry would not be officially reactivated unless they activated 3rd, 4th, and 5th Battalions, or an equal number of separate companies, or a mix. For example, if they reactivated 3rd Battalion of the 506 as an air assault infantry battalion, maybe brigades are enlarged from 3 to 4 battalions or something, designated the multifunctional reconnaissance company of 1st Brigade 101st Airborne Division Delta Company of the 506, and formed a long-range surveillance company for use by higher-level commanders, that LRS company would be Echo Company of the 506th, with Easy Company's official lineage. There has been some rule breaking during wartime though, especially with regard to the lettering. The 50th Infantry during Vietnam, for example, had 2 mechanized battalions active, the 1st Battalion as a core level reinforcing unit which deployed to Vietnam, and the 2nd Battalion which didn't. 1st Battalion fought with 4 companies, Alpha to Delta. In addition, the 50th Infantry had the separate Echo and Fox companies that provided long-range reconnaissance patrols to the 9th and 25th Infantry divisions. After those were reflagged as elements of the 75th Infantry in 1969, 50th Infantry Echo and Fox companies were re-raised in 1971 as rifle security companies, providing sentries and escort in support of high-level logistics units. Based on pure inference, I'm guessing that Echo and Fox companies were chosen as names for the separate companies because 1st Battalion ended with Delta and not because of the Army's lineage logic. If they went with Army logic though, they should have been Charlie and Delta companies. Things were kind of messy in Vietnam and there were a lot of provisional units, so it makes sense that they did something a little more intuitive.
It don't matter. None of this matters.
As for the 506th, its original Company E lineage hasn't been used since 1957, but despite all that, 2nd Battalion of the 506th uses the historical names of the companies it had before 1948 as nicknames for its current companies. This is very common practice throughout the Army, just instead of boyish things like Gunfighter Company, Dealer Company, or Killer Troop, they have an HBO miniseries behind them, and unless you're a giant nerd like me, it's all anyone actually cares about. As stated before, companies are lettered in a battalion sequence, so 2nd Battalion 506 has an HHC, and Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta companies. These are their actual Army-wide designations. The first 3 are rifle companies, while the 4th is a weapons company being reorganized as a multi-purpose company. They also have Company J of the 626th Brigade Support Battalion attached for logistical support, but that's not part of the 506. Other than the HQ, which is related to the World War II era Baker Company, these companies have no deeper official lineage before they were constituted out of thin air on January 21st, 1964. However, internal to the battalion, Alpha Company is referred to as Easy Company, Bravo is Dog, Charlie is Fox, Delta is Whiskey, likely because of weapons, and the HHC is India. Interestingly, Dog Company's guidon has Dog written directly on it, while Whiskey Company has the more typical D, its actual designation. I'm told that Fox Company usually uses a guidon with an F on it, while Easy Company uses E. This is despite HQ companies not traditionally being lettered, Dog Company having been the first company of 2nd Battalion during World War II, and Easy Company the second company. I'd suggest not thinking too hard about it. All this is to say, we're holding out for the day when they create a separate Echo Company 506 Infantry, and everyone in 2nd Battalion ignores the big army when they tell them that they're the true holder of Easy Company lore. Maybe it'll happen by the events of Halo. To wrap it up, I want to explain how CARs changed how unit abbreviations were styled. Before CARs, they really only used a slash to denote subordination, like E/2/506 to denote Easy Company 2nd Battalion of the 506th, or even just E/506 because there's only one Company E in the regiment. After CARs though, the army added in a dash when talking about relationships that were purely about lineage, so A/1-506 would be the post-CARs Alpha Company 1st Battalion of the 506th. The company and battalion relationship is real, but the regiment is just a name. Meanwhile, D-52 would be the separate Delta Company of the 52nd. The company is real, but it's not under the direct command of a 52nd regiment. When it was an anti-armor company, it was under the command of a Stryker BCT. There are plenty of cases of official army bodies getting the convention wrong as well, especially for separate companies where it just feels more natural to use a slash. And who can blame them?
By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
By contrast, 2/1ID is perfectly fine to talk about the 2nd Brigade, 1st Infantry Division, because those are real units. As well, it actually has a lineage that spans back to 1917 with 2nd Infantry Brigade, 1st Expeditionary Division, so it covers both bases. There's both a direct command relationship and a lineage relationship. But one head-scratcher is the 7th Infantry Division's brigades being designated 1st and 2nd Stryker Brigade combat teams, 2nd Infantry Division, 7th Infantry Division, and abbreviated 1-2 and 2-2. This is because 7th ID was stood up in 2012 to handle administration of brigades for the Korea-deployed 2nd Infantry Division while they're in the US. These brigades were recently repatched to wear the 7th Division's insignia, but their HQs aren't related to the lineage of the 7th Division's inactive 1st and 2nd Brigades. As a result, they can't do 1/7 because they could always reactivate 1st Brigade's 7th Infantry Division at any time as a 3rd Brigade within the division. It wouldn't be the most logical way of doing it, but the Army has done worse. Alternatively, if they reflag 1st Brigade's 2nd Infantry Division to 1st Brigade's 7th Infantry Division, then 1st Brigade 2nd Infantry Division's lineage would return to the pool of inactive unit lineages. They could then immediately reactivate 1st Brigade 2nd Infantry Division in Korea with completely different people than carry that name yesterday. This has been a very common thing to do historically, the Army moving battalion, brigade, and division names across the world with the snap of a finger. When that happens, it almost makes you think that the whole point of this designation system is to make someone happy that the unit name exists at all, and not actually about the people serving in that unit today. Thanks again.